very interesting to see how Pop handles the rotation in the upcoming season for our San Antonio Spurs. So I thought, you know what? People keep asking about it. Let's talk about it today. What is up, San Antonio Spurs fans? Welcome to TSR Sports. Hope you're having a great weekend. And I was doing some thinking this morning. I was like, I'm seeing different iterations of the Spurs starting lineup online. Why don't I share what I'm seeing? And then, of course, we're going to get to TSR starting lineup. And then, of course, you guys are going to, I'm sure, drop comments down below what you think the starting lineup should be, what you think the bench rotation should be. Let's get into it. First, let's pull up the ESPN depth chart, which I pretty much agree with this. I do think a starting lineup is going to be Chris Paul, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama, with the primary bench players being Tre Jones, Stephon Castle, Keldon Johnson, and Zach Collins. Then after that, we'll see with Malachi Branham, Julian Champagnie, and Blake Wesley, and there are some players that are left off in here, which is why I wanted to make my own depth chart. But the main reason I'm also doing this video is I saw a depth chart by The Athletic that made me going, huh? And just happens to be this thumbnail that we're looking at right here. This is what The Athletic thinks our starting lineup is going to be next season. CP3, Stephon Castle starting at shooting guard, so kind of a Derek White role, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and Victor Wembanyama. And many of you on the channel have suggested a lineup similar to this, except maybe with Sohan starting and Barnes coming off the bench. I have a problem with this depth chart immediately when I see Julian Champagnie listed as a shooting guard. I'm like, what? Julian Champagnie, a shooting guard? He is not. So that seems to be a big, giant error, so let's disregard that. But having Sohan come off the bench really just is why I wanted to talk about this. Is he the odd man out because of his non-shooting? I don't think so. Not yet. Definitely not yet. He's a 9th overall pick a few years ago. The Spurs are not giving up on him yet. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is the TSR depth chart. The starting lineup, same as ESPN. I have it as CP3, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama. I think that's the way the Spurs are going to roll. And with this starting lineup, this gives up some shooting around Wemby. Granted, we don't have a lights-out 45% three-point shooter in this lineup. We have a lot of good and capable three-point shooters, starting with Chris Paul, 37% from last year. Harrison Barnes, 39%. Devin Vassell, 37%. The odd man, of course, is Sohan. He was a good three-point shooter for a good portion of last season. A lot of people forget from October to January, and I ran the numbers on Basketball Reference, he shot 37% from three, which puts him in line with everybody else. That's fine. That's good enough, right? 37%, solid, above the NBA average. 35%? The problem is, for whatever reason, in February and March, his three-point shooting fell off a cliff, and he shot 22% from three, which is abysmal. And those are the months that we saw teams daring Jeremy to shoot, literally playing off of him 6 feet or more. Go ahead. And he took the shot, and most of the time, he missed it. So if Jeremy can become that 37% guy for a whole season, that's going to give us some pretty darn good floor spacing. If Wemby can also up his three-point game, I don't remember what his percentage was last year, but it was not great. Was it about 33%? Granted, he's not floor spacing for himself, but if we can have some good floor spacing, that's going to really help unlock Lob City 2.0 with the primary targets being Wemby and Jeremy Sohan. Defensively, this lineup, yes, Wemby, arguably the best. I think he's the best defender in the league. Some will say Rudy Gobert. Disagree. Let's not get into that. We already talked about it on the channel. Sohan's a good defender. Vassell is hit or miss. Barnes, not a good defender at this point in his career. In CP3, I don't know if he's a good defender or not. Didn't watch him enough last year I know he was a great defender in All-NBA at one point in his career. Those skills are probably still there. So at his age, he's probably still a solid, if undersized, defender in today's NBA. So I think defensively, we're going to kind of be where we were last year, where we're going to give up some points, but also there's going to be a lot of shots rejected in the paint. As far as our bench, we're going to have Tre Jones running the second unit, which I think is going to make the unit just run so much smoother. And I can see Stephon Castle being a secondary playmaker. Keldon coming off the bench too would probably be the primary scorer. Champagnie not starting anymore, playing the power forward role off the bench, who was a solid defender last year. People forget in limited action, he was a solid defender, and then Zach Collins, our backup center. We have some three-point shooting here. Champagnie can shoot. Keldon's hit or miss, but he does have times where he can be hot and hit the three. Zach, while he had one of his worst years from beyond the arc last year, can be a 35 to 36 three-point shooter. Castle remains the same. Jones was a good three-point shooter last year. I know it's not about three-point shooting, but I'm just putting it out there because it gets brought up a lot. And offensively, this lineup has some strengths and issues. The biggest issues, of course, immediately are Kelvin and Zach. But hopefully Julian and Stefan can make up for their lack of defense. And Trey certainly puts the effort in, but he's undersized as a point guard. And then it brings us to the last line there. Mamu and Bassi, as of this video, have not been re-signed by the Spurs, but all signs point they will be, so I put them on the depth chart. And from left to right, from the 1 to 5, Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, Sidi Sissoko, Mama Kelishvili, and Charles Bassi. This is tough because we were trying to develop Wesley and Branham last year, and they showed glimpses. Branham, I think, had 3 or 4 games in a row where he scored 20 points. Then he went right back to his old 0s and 2s. Something's got to be seen in the preseason, or an injury. Something's going to have to happen for those guys to crack the rotation. I think this is going to be the last year of the Wesley and Branham experiment, if you will. I don't know if they're under contract for next year. It might be a team option. But you can only develop players for so long. Jeremy's going to get that, get the asterisk of how long you can develop players because he was a lottery pick. So you're going to spend a little more time with a lottery pick than you would a late first-round pick, and definitely more time than a second-round pick. I do think this year is kind of that make-or-break year for Sohan as well. If he's going to remain a starter, if he's abysmal offensively and just average defense, then we're going to have to yank him out of the starting lineup. And maybe we do go small with Paul, Vassell, Castle, Barnes, and Wemby. Who the heck knows? But I am truly, truly interested on what the Spurs are going to do with the rotations this year. We know for darn sure Wemby's going to get the most minutes. Castle, even if he's coming off the bench, is going to get, I would think, at least 25 minutes a game. Right now, the Spurs' primary goal, I think, in the season, and they are trying to win some games. We didn't bring in CP3 and Harrison Barnes in just to win 22 games again. But, Wemby, the primary focus. Castle's development is right there. And Sohan, I think, is right there, too. This is the big year for Jerry. This is the big year for Sohan. What happens? Does he play just like he did last year? And the Spurs are like, well, you know what? We're not seeing improvement. Maybe he comes off the bench next year. Maybe he gets demoted to the bench this year. I don't know. I'm rooting for him. I am rooting for him. There's also the question marks with Kelman. Can he adjust to the role as a sixth man and maybe start playing some defense off the bench since he's playing less minutes and be the spark plug off the bench that we want him to be? Is he working with Manu Ginobili in the offseason to acclimate himself to that role and what's needed? Don't know. A lot of questions for our Spurs going into the season. I'm excited. I love talking Spurs with you guys. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I'd love to have you join our community. I love hearing your comments. Let me know. Is this your starting lineup here? Are you like, you know what? I want Castle in the starting lineup. Is Harrison Barnes putting him off the bench so we have some three-point shooting and putting Sohan in the starting lineup? Very curious to see what the Spurs do. Very curious what you think. Appreciate y'all being here. Hit the thumbs up if that helps with the channel. And subscribe to become, again, part of this awesome Spurs community. I thank you, and as always, oh, by the way, be live tonight for the Hawks. The Spurs play the Hawks, I think, at 8 p.m. Some introduction to Zachary Rassache on an NBA court. So I'm extremely excited for that. Hope he plays. Hope Castle plays. That's all I got. I'm rambling. Thank you. And as always, go Spurs, go.
And then it makes it to Wemby.